Good morning. It is May 24th, 8:37 a.m. If I was in Colorado, I would have made my weekend pension hedge. And if you're on the streets right now at some sort of street church, right down from City Hall, then you may or may not be able to pick up some current concurrent to what I'm about to say. I'm very, very interested in and very supportive of individuals that understand themselves to be targeted individuals that are doing what they can to protect themselves and express themselves at this time. And so I've already said I encourage you to contact me if you need to or you want to. But I also want whoever is using you as a human shield to contact me as well. See, in this whole process, there's a lot of people that are under a lot of stress right now. A lot of heat is being applied. And part of what ends up happening in situations like this is they engage in all of these different strategies in order to try to reduce their exposure to risk, especially if they're under scrutiny for some sort of fraud or malfeasance, or maybe they've made some bad financial decisions, or maybe right now at their point in the pipeline that's coming due, some sort of option that they set up way earlier that they were just hoping to wave off onto somebody else, but unfortunately ended up being magged right back to them. And so, one of the options that sometimes they try to avail themselves of is these little swaps they do, where they take their identity and they swap it out with somebody else. And it's really advantageous in some ways to swap it out with somebody that's like a no one. Just some private individual may or may not have something stable in their lives, but most likely has something that's actually incredibly valuable. They just don't realize how valuable it is. Like somebody that's incredibly gifted with visual art, like somebody that has a penchant for spontaneously organizing things according to size. Somebody that is able to pick up on the nuances in fluctuating bandwidths that end up expressing themselves sometimes as different memes and memes, including ones that conflict with each other, and that somebody tries to diagnose with an illness so that they can get a medical billing record that can then, after a certain amount of time, be anonymized and sold or resold as some sort of data. See, we are more than 10 years into the Affordable Care Act implementation. And by law, medical providers only had to keep your medical records on site for 7 years. And by law, they, unless you have another justification or another way to access it, only have to give you personally access to the last 7 years of your medical records. What happens to your medical records after 7 years? Somebody else just might have them. Not only that, there's all these laws that while they were never passed, were put into committee and they weren't voted down, which means they're still pending. What do you think they do in committee? Do you think maybe they take a law that's been proposed and maybe try to evaluate whether or not actually passing it would be a good idea? So that when the committee writes its report and presents its report on whether or not to recommend it, or the sponsor or one of the co sponsors gets up and talks about whether or not to support it, that they already have some reference points that they can base it on. So, what happens if you have a law that's on the book for 5, 10 years, 20 years, and nobody's voted against it? It's just in committee. There's hundreds of laws that are just in committee. Now, maybe somewhere there's like a default where, well, if it hasn't been voted on up or down, it just, we just, it's taken out of consideration. Well, that's not true because there are still active electronic accounts for all of them in at least one place. And at the time they get set up, somebody has a record connected to their district of them sponsoring or co sponsoring or a public notice about their support of it. That does not expire in the same way. So the question then becomes one of who is swapping you out to deflect what's being targeted at them? I hope you get to speak with them in person. I hope you get to share and commiserate. That you get to share with them what you've experienced and they get to share with you a justification for why they let it happen. I hope that happens to you. I hope it happens in the very near future.